Behind the golden gates of Ravenscroft Palace, where centuries of tradition dictate every breath and royal protocol governs every heartbeat, a storm is brewing that threatens to tear apart the very foundation of the monarchy. Queen Consort Isabella Montrose, a woman who fought tooth and nail to claim her place beside the throne, now finds herself facing her greatest challenge yet, not from the press, not from Parliament, but from within her own family. Princess Catherine Ashford, beloved by the people and married to Crown Prince Alexander, represents everything Isabella fears she will never be. Naturally graceful, effortlessly charming, and genuinely loved by a nation that still whispers doubts about Isabella's worthiness. What began as subtle competition has escalated into a dangerous game of power, manipulation, and survival at the highest levels of royalty. When Isabella's desperation leads her to cross lines that should never be crossed, threatening not just Catherine's reputation, but the safety of her young children, Prince Alexander must make an impossible choice. Does he protect his wife and children at the cost of destroying his relationship with his father, King Marcus? Or does he remain silent while the woman he loves becomes the target of a calculated campaign designed to drive her from the palace forever? In a world where every move is scrutinized, every word is measured, and every alliance can shift with the morning news, one family's private war is about to become very public. The crown that unites them may be the very thing that destroys them all. This is the story of what happens when the fairy tale ends and real life begins. When the palace walls that are meant to protect become a prison, and when the people you trust most become the ones you should fear. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the state drawing room as Queen Consort Isabella Montrose stood perfectly still, her manicured fingers gripping the morning newspapers with enough force to leave crescent-shaped marks in the paper. The headline screamed what she had feared for months. Princess Catherine's charitable work wins hearts across the Commonwealth, and the people's princess, why Catherine Ashford is the future of the monarchy. Isabella's reflection in the gilt mirror showed a woman of 52 who had spent decades perfecting the art of royal composure. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon. Her navy Chanel suit was immaculate, and her smile could charm diplomats and world leaders alike. But behind her emerald eyes burned a fury that threatened to consume everything she had worked so hard to achieve. "Your Majesty," whispered Lady Margaret Thornfield, Isabella's closest confidant and lady-in-waiting for the past 15 years. Margaret had witnessed Isabella's rise from a divorced aristocrat with questionable finances to the Queen Consort of Ravenscroft, and she understood the delicate balance of power that kept Isabella's position secure. "Perhaps we should focus on your upcoming visit to the Children's Hospital. The press coverage will be substantial." Isabella set down the newspapers with deliberate precision. "Margaret, do you see these headlines? Do you see how they speak of her as if she's already queen?" Her voice was measured, controlled, but Margaret could hear the dangerous edge beneath the calm exterior. "Catherine Ashford has been in this family for 8 years. 8 years, Margaret. I have been by King Marcus's side for 12 years. And yet they write about her as if she's the second coming of Queen Elizabeth herself." The truth was more complex than Isabella cared to admit, even to herself. When she had married King Marcus 3 years after his first wife's tragic death in a car accident, the nation had been skeptical. Isabella's first marriage to a wealthy businessman had ended in a very public divorce involving allegations of affairs and financial disputes. The press had nicknamed her the opportunist. When her relationship with the grieving king became public knowledge just 18 months after the Queen's funeral. But Isabella had been determined to prove her worth. She had studied royal protocol until she could recite it backwards. She had learned 4 languages fluently. She had championed causes close to her heart with genuine passion and dedication. Slowly, painfully, she had begun to win over the press and the people. Her approval ratings had climbed from a dismal 23% to a respectable 68% over the years. Then, Catherine Ashford had married Crown Prince Alexander, and everything changed. Catherine was everything the fairy tales promised a princess should be. At 34, she was naturally elegant without appearing to try. Her background as art teacher and museum curator made her relatable to ordinary people, while her genuine love for Prince Alexander was obvious to anyone who saw them together. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. When she spoke to children, she knelt to their level. When she visited hospitals or opened schools, she remembered names and asked follow-up questions about people she had met months earlier. Most infuriating of all, Catherine seemed completely unaware of the effect she had on people. She wasn't calculating or strategic in her public appearances. She was simply herself, and somehow that was exactly what the nation wanted to see. Isabella moved to the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens, where she could see Catherine playing with her two young children, Prince James, age 6, and Princess Emma, age 4. Catherine had changed out of her formal morning dress and was now wearing simple jeans and a sweater, pushing Emma on a swing while James climbed the elaborate wooden playhouse that had been built specially for the royal grandchildren. "She makes it look so effortless," Isabella murmured, watching as Catherine laughed at something Emma said, her head thrown back in genuine delight. "No tu raperos, no stajamoments. Just real." Margaret joined her at the window. "The people do respond to authenticity, Your Majesty." "Authenticity," Isabella repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "What they call authenticity, I call a lack of understanding about what this role really requires." Catherine has never had to fight for anything in her life. She married Alexander when his approval ratings were already sky high. She's never had to win over a hostile press or prove that she deserves to wear the crown jewels. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the gardens, and Isabella watched as Prince Alexander appeared, still wearing his morning meeting attire, but loosening his tie as he jogged toward his family. He swept Emma up in his arms and spun her around while Catherine wrapped her arms around James from behind, all of them dissolving into giggles. Isabella remembered her own childhood, spent in a crumbling estate where her parents fought constantly about money. She remembered her first marriage, where she had tried so hard to be the perfect society wife that she had lost herself completely. She remembered the years after her divorce, when she had been forced to rebuild her life from nothing, when every invitation to social events came with whispered speculation about her motives and her finances. She had clawed her way to this position through sheer determination and strategic thinking. Every public appearance was carefully planned. Every speech was rehearsed until it was perfect. Every outfit was chosen to send the right message. She had made herself into the woman she thought the country needed, and it had worked. Until now. "Margaret," Isabella said, her voice taking on a tone that her lady-in-waiting recognized immediately. It was the voice Isabella used when she had made a decision that others might not understand. "I want you to arrange a meeting with Jonathan Blackwood from the Daily Chronicle. Tell him I have some concerns about palace security that I think the public should be aware of." Margaret's expression grew cautious. Jonathan Blackwood was known for his investigative pieces about the royal family, and his articles often carried a subtle poison that could destroy reputations with surgical precision. "Your Majesty, what kind of security concerns?" Isabella turned from the window, her face now wearing the serene mask she had perfected over years of royal duties. "Oh, nothing too dramatic. Just some questions about how thoroughly background checks are conducted on people who marry into the family. Questions about whether certain individuals might have undisclosed relationships or financial entanglements that could pose risks to the crown." "Your Majesty," Margaret said carefully, "are you certain this is wise? If such allegations were to prove unfounded." "I'm not making allegations, Margaret. I'm simply expressing concerns. As Queen Consort, it's my duty to protect this family and this institution." Isabella moved to her desk and began sorting through correspondence with the same precision she applied to everything else. After all, we can't be too careful these days. The monarchy's reputation is too precious to risk. Margaret understood the assignment, even if she didn't approve of it. She had seen Isabella's strategic mind at work many times over the years, and While it had often served the queen consort well, there was something different about this situation. Catherine Ashford wasn't a political opponent or a social rival. She was family. She was the mother of the future king's children. But Isabella was already moving on to other matters, dictating responses to letters, and reviewing her schedule for the following week. To anyone watching, she appeared to be conducting ordinary royal business. Only Margaret could see the slight tremor in her hands and the way her jaw clenched whenever Catherine's laughter echoed up from the gardens. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the palace's private family wing, Catherine was helping her children out of their outdoor clothes, completely unaware that the woman she had always tried so hard to please was planning her destruction. Catherine had always found Isabella intimidating, but had attributed it to the natural adjustment period that came with joining any family, especially one as complex as the royal family. "Mummy, can we have tea with Grandmother Isabella tomorrow?" Emma asked as Catherine brushed grass stains off her daughter's dress. She promised to show me her jewelry collection. Catherine smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Despite Isabella's sometimes cool demeanor, she had always been kind to the children, and Catherine appreciated how hard Isabella worked to build relationships with them. "We'll ask Grandmother Isabella when we see her at dinner tonight, sweetheart." As Catherine helped her children wash their hands and prepare for lunch, she reflected on how fortunate she felt to be part of this family. Yes, the public scrutiny was intense, and yes, there were days when the weight of royal expectations felt overwhelming. But she had Alexander's unwavering support, adorable children who kept her grounded, and a sense of purpose in her royal duties that she had never experienced in her previous career. If someone had told her that morning that her position in the family was about to come under attack from within, she would have laughed. After 8 years of marriage, she felt secure in her role and confident in her relationships. She trusted her family to protect her, just as she would protect them. That trust was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Later that afternoon, while Catherine was reading stories to James and Emma in the nursery, Isabella was sitting in her private study having tea with Jonathan Blackwood. The journalist was a thin man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper pen, known for his ability to take the smallest grain of truth and cultivate it into a full-blown scandal. "Your Majesty," Blackwood said, setting down his teacup with practiced elegance, "I must say I'm intrigued by your concerns about palace security protocols. Can you be more specific about what's troubling you?" Isabella had spent hours preparing for this conversation, crafting her words to plant seeds of doubt without making direct accusations that could be traced back to her. "Well, Jonathan, as you know, when someone marries into the royal family, they become a target for all sorts of individuals who might wish to exploit that connection. I've been wondering lately whether our vetting processes are as thorough as they need to be." "Are you referring to anyone in particular?" Blackwood's pen was already moving across his notepad. "Oh, I wouldn't want to point fingers," Isabella said, her voice carrying just the right note of reluctant concern. "But I do think the public has a right to know that we take these matters seriously. For instance, financial background checks, investigation of past relationships, verification of claim qualifications, and work history. These things matter when national security could be at stake." Blackwood nodded slowly. He was already thinking about which of his sources he could tap to dig into the background of various royal family members. The Queen Consort's meaning was clear enough. She wanted him to investigate Catherine Ashford. "Your Majesty, are you aware of any specific security risks that the palace might be overlooking?" Isabella's smile was perfectly calibrated, concerned but not accusatory, protective but not paranoid. "I'm not aware of any specific threats, of course, but I do think there are sometimes discrepancies in the stories people tell about their past. Small things, perhaps, but in our position, small things can become big problems very quickly." She reached for a folder on her desk and withdrew several photographs that had been taken at various royal events over the years. "For example, look at these photos from the Commonwealth Gala 2 years ago. Do you see this man in the background? He appears to be watching Princess Catherine very intently. And here, she indicated another photo this same man at the children's charity luncheon last spring. Interesting that he would be at both events, don't you think? Blackwood examined the photos carefully. The man in question was nondescript. Medium height, dark hair, wearing ordinary formal attire that would allow him to blend in at any upscale event. Have you reported this to palace security? Of course, Isabella said smoothly. But I'm told that unless there's evidence of a direct threat, there's little they can do. Still, I do worry about people who might have complicated histories with members of our family. People who might know things that could be embarrassing or damaging if they were to speak to the wrong journalists. The implication was clear. Isabella was suggesting that Catherine might have secrets in her past, secrets that could be exploited by individuals with questionable motives. She wasn't making direct accusations, but she was providing enough breadcrumbs for a skilled investigative journalist to follow. Your Majesty, Blackwood said, I appreciate you bringing these concerns to my attention. I'll certainly look into these matters with the discretion and thoroughness they deserve. As Blackwood gathered his notes and prepared to leave, Isabella felt a surge of satisfaction. She had set the wheels in motion without leaving her fingerprints on them. If Catherine's reputation was about to come under scrutiny, it would appear to be the result of legitimate journalistic investigation, not a calculated attack by a jealous family member. The game had begun, and Isabella intended to win. That evening, the royal family gathered for dinner in the private dining room, a tradition that King Marcus had maintained throughout his reign as a way of ensuring that despite their public duties, they remained connected as a family. The conversation was light and pleasant, focusing on the children's activities and upcoming royal engagements. Catherine noticed that Isabella seemed particularly animated, asking detailed questions about Catherine's recent visit to a women's shelter and expressing interest in Catherine's plans for expanding her literacy programs in underserved communities. Catherine was touched by Isabella's apparent enthusiasm and found herself opening up about her hopes and dreams for her royal work. I've always believed that education is the great equalizer, Catherine said as she helped Emma cut her roast beef. If we can help children develop a love of reading and learning from an early age, we can change the trajectory of entire communities. Isabella nodded approvingly. Such noble goals, my dear. I'm curious, though, where did your passion for education come from? I know you worked as an art teacher before your marriage, but was there something in your own background that sparked this interest? The question seemed innocent enough, but Margaret, who was serving the meal, caught the subtle intensity in Isabella's gaze as she waited for Catherine's response. Catherine smiled as she reflected on the question. I suppose it came from my own struggles in school. I had undiagnosed dyslexia until I was 12, so I know firsthand what it feels like to be a bright child who's failing academically. Once I got the right support, everything changed for me. I want to make sure other children don't have to struggle the way I did. How wonderful that you were able to overcome such challenges, Isabella said warmly. And your family was supportive during that difficult time? Oh yes, absolutely. My parents were incredible. They never made me feel stupid or inadequate, even when I was bringing home terrible report cards. Catherine's expression grew fond as she remembered her childhood. My mother spent countless hours reading with me, and my father would create these elaborate games to help me practice spelling and math. They believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Isabella filed away every detail of Catherine's story, already thinking about how those childhood struggles could be twisted into questions about Catherine's intellectual capacity or educational qualifications. A woman who had struggled with learning disabilities. Might there be other areas where she had stretched the truth about her capabilities? Prince Alexander, who had been listening to his wife's story with obvious admiration, reached over to squeeze Catherine's hand. That's one of the things I love most about you, he said. You turn your own challenges into ways to help others. The literacy programs you've started have already helped thousands of children. King Marcus raised his wine glass. To Catherine, whose compassion and dedication continue to make our family and our kingdom stronger. As the family toasted, Isabella smiled and raised her glass with the rest of them. But behind her smile, she was already planning her next move. Catherine's story of overcoming dyslexia was touching, but Isabella wondered what other aspects of Catherine's educational background might be worth examining. Had she really earned all those degrees she claimed? Had her teaching positions been as successful as she said? Were there any students or parents who might have complaints about her performance? The dinner continued with pleasant conversation about upcoming royal tours and family holiday plans, but Isabella's mind was elsewhere. She was thinking like a chess player, considering all the possible moves and countermoves that lay ahead. Catherine was strong and well-loved, but everyone had weaknesses. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had something they preferred to keep hidden. Isabella's job was to find Catherine's weakness and exploit it before Catherine even realized she was under attack. As the evening wound down and the family began to retire to their respective wings of the palace, Isabella caught Margaret's eye and nodded slightly. Margaret understood that tomorrow would bring a new phase of their campaign. Neither Catherine nor Alexander had any idea that the woman they trusted as a mother and mentor was systematically planning to destroy everything they had built together. The palace that had always been their sanctuary was about to become a battlefield, and the war was just beginning. 3 weeks after Jonathan Blackwood's visit to the palace, the first article appeared on the front page of the Daily Chronicle under the headline, "Questions Surround Princess Catherine's Past. What don't we know about our future queen?" The piece was masterfully crafted, raising doubts without making direct accusations, presenting concerns from palace sources without revealing that the source was the queen consort herself. Catherine first learned about the article when her private secretary, Amanda Rothwell, burst into her morning meeting about the upcoming Commonwealth Children's Summit with a tablet in her trembling hands. "Your Royal Highness," Amanda said, her usually composed demeanor cracking with obvious distress. "I'm afraid there's been a development in the press that requires your immediate attention." Catherine set down her coffee cup and accepted the tablet, her eyebrows rising as she read the headline. "Questions about my past? What kind of questions?" She scrolled through the article, her confusion growing with each paragraph. The piece questioned whether Catherine's claimed teaching credentials had been properly verified, suggested that her museum work might have involved handling artifacts with questionable provenance, and hinted that there were unexplained gaps in her employment history that palace officials had failed to investigate thoroughly. Most damaging of all, it included quotes from anonymous sources claiming that Catherine had been less than forthcoming about certain relationships from her past. "This is ridiculous," Catherine said, looking up from the tablet. "My credentials were thoroughly vetted before Alexander, and I even announced our engagement. The palace conducted the most comprehensive background check I've ever heard of. They verified everything from my university transcripts to my childhood medical records." Amanda nodded sympathetically. "I know that, Your Royal Highness, and so does everyone who worked on your transition into the royal family. But the article is raising questions that will need to be addressed publicly. Sir Kenneth Morrison from the Palace Press Office is requesting an urgent meeting to discuss our response strategy." Catherine felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. After 8 years as a member of the royal family, she had experienced her share of negative press coverage, but this felt different. The previous articles had criticized her fashion choices or questioned her priorities in selecting charitable causes. This attack was personal, striking at the heart of her integrity and honesty. "Has Prince Alexander seen this yet?" Catherine asked, already dreading the conversation they would need to have. "I believe he's being briefed by his private secretary as we speak," Amanda replied. "There's also been a request from Buckingham Palace for a family meeting this afternoon. The king wants to address this situation before it spreads to other publications." 20 minutes later, Catherine was walking through the palace corridors toward Alexander's office, her mind racing with questions about who could have provided the information quoted in the article. The palace sources clearly had access to detailed information about the security and background check processes, which meant the leak had come from someone with significant access to confidential royal operations. She found Alexander standing behind his desk, still wearing his morning riding attire, holding a copy of the Daily Chronicle in his hands. His jaw was clenched in a way that Catherine recognized as barely contained fury. "Alex," she said softly, closing the office door behind her. He looked up, and Catherine could see the protective anger burning in his eyes. "Catherine, this is complete rubbish. Every word of it. Your background was investigated more thoroughly than any royal bride in history. These people are just looking for scandal where none exists." Catherine moved around the desk to stand beside him, grateful for his immediate and unwavering support, but still feeling shaken by the experience of seeing her integrity questioned in print. But who would have access to the kind of information quoted in this article? The sources they cite clearly no details about palace security protocols and background check procedures. Alexander set down the newspaper and pulled Catherine into his arms. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. This isn't random journalism, Catherine. Someone fed this story to Blackwood, and whoever it was had an agenda." Before Catherine could respond, there was a knock on the office door. "Come in," Alexander called. Sir Kenneth Morrison entered, followed by Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, head of Royal Protection Services. Both looked grim. "Your Royal Highnesses," Sir Kenneth began, "I'm afraid the situation is more complex than we initially thought. 3 other major publications have contacted our press office in the past hour, claiming they have additional information about Princess Catherine's background that they intend to publish." Detective Inspector Williams stepped forward. "Sir, we've conducted a preliminary investigation into the source of the leaked information. The details published in the Chronicle could only have come from someone with access to the most confidential levels of palace security files." Catherine felt Alexander's arms tighten around her. "Are you saying this is an inside job?" he asked. "I'm saying that whoever provided this information to Mr. Blackwood has security clearance that extends to the highest levels of palace operations," Williams replied carefully. "We're conducting a full investigation, but I wanted to alert you that this situation is likely to escalate before we can contain it." As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Darling, are you all right? The most awful stories are appearing online. Please call when you can." Catherine showed the message to Alexander, who immediately pulled out his own phone to check the latest social media trends. His expression darkened as he scrolled through Twitter, where #CatherineGate was already beginning to trend, with royal watchers and tabloid enthusiasts dissecting every claim in the Chronicle article. "This is exactly what they want," Alexander said, his voice tight with anger. "They want us to look defensive to appear to be hiding something. They're trying to create a scandal from thin air." Sir Kenneth cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, we do need to consider our response strategy carefully. The longer we go without addressing these allegations directly, the more credibility they gain in the public mind." "What allegations?" Catherine asked, her voice rising slightly. "They haven't actually alleged anything specific. They've just raised vague questions and cited anonymous sources making unsubstantiated claims." "That's precisely the problem," Sir Kenneth replied. "The article is crafted to imply wrongdoing without making specific claims that could be definitively disproven. It's a very sophisticated character assassination." Detective Inspector Williams spoke up again. "Your Royal Highnesses, I need to ask some questions that may seem intrusive, but we need to be prepared for whatever else might be coming. The Chronicle article mentions unexplained gaps in employment history and suggests there may be undisclosed relationships from Princess Catherine's past. Are there any aspects of your background, Your Royal Highness, that could be taken out of context or misrepresented?" Catherine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and frustration. "Detective Inspector, my entire life was examined under a microscope before I married Alexander. Every job I've ever held, every person I've ever dated, every grade I received in university, it was all investigated and verified. There are no gaps in my employment history, and there are certainly no secret relationships that I've hidden from my husband or the palace." Alexander moved protectively closer to Catherine. "Detective Inspector, I appreciate that you're trying to help us prepare for whatever else might be published, but I won't have my wife subjected to the kind of interrogation that implies she's done something wrong." "Of course not, sir. I'm simply trying to understand what we might be dealing with." Before anyone could respond, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was Lady Margaret Thornfield, looking unusually flustered. "Your Royal Highnesses," Margaret said with a slight bow. "I do apologize for interrupting, but Queen Consort Isabella has asked me to inform you that she's moved the family meeting to this afternoon up to 11 o'clock this morning. She feels it's urgent that the family present a united front as quickly as possible." Catherine felt a surge of gratitude toward Isabella. Despite their sometimes complicated relationship, Catherine appreciated that Isabella recognized the importance of family solidarity during a crisis. "Please tell Queen Consort Isabella that we'll be there," Alexander said. After Margaret left, Catherine turned to Sir Kenneth and Detective Inspector Williams. "What exactly are you recommending as our immediate response?" "For now, we recommend a brief statement affirming your commitment to transparency and your confidence that any investigation will confirm the accuracy of all information provided during your background checks," Sir Kenneth said. "We want to avoid getting drawn into a point-by-point refutation of claims that are intentionally vague." "And what about the investigation into who leaked the information?" Alexander asked Detective Inspector Williams. "We're reviewing security protocols and conducting interviews with everyone who had access to the relevant files. However, I should warn you that this type of investigation can be time-consuming, and the damage to public perception may occur faster than we can identify the source." After Sir Kenneth and Detective Inspector Williams left, Catherine and Alexander had a few minutes alone before the family meeting. Catherine sat in one of the office's leather armchairs, feeling overwhelmed by the rapid escalation of events. "Alex, I keep thinking about who could have done this. The information in that article, it's not just confidential, it's personal. Someone who knows the details of my background check process, someone who understands palace security protocols." Alexander knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Catherine, I need you to listen to me. We will get through this, and we will find out who's responsible. But right now, I need you to focus on protecting yourself and our children. Don't let whoever is doing this make you doubt yourself or question your place in this family." Catherine squeezed his hands gratefully. "I just can't understand why someone would want to hurt me like this. I've tried so hard to serve this family and this country with integrity. I've never tried to overshadow anyone or grab attention for myself." "That might be exactly why someone sees you as a threat," Alexander said quietly. Before Catherine could ask what he meant, it was time to head to the family meeting. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the king's private study, Catherine tried to prepare herself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. She hoped that Isabella's suggestion to move up the meeting time indicated that the family was ready to close ranks and defend her against these attacks. They arrived at King Marcus's study to find Isabella already there, looking impeccably composed in a dove-gray suit. She rose immediately when Catherine and Alexander entered. "Catherine, my dear," Isabella said, crossing the room to embrace her daughter-in-law warmly. "I'm so sorry you're having to deal with this horrible situation. The things these journalists will do for a story, it's absolutely unconscionable." Catherine felt some of her tension ease as Isabella's apparent support. "Thank you, Isabella. I have to admit, I'm feeling quite shaken by the whole thing." "Of course you are, darling. Anyone would be. But you mustn't let them see that you're rattled. That's exactly what they want." King Marcus entered the study, his expression grave. At 71, he had weathered many royal scandals and crises, and Catherine could see the experienced concern in his eyes as he greeted his family. "Catherine," he said, taking her hands in his, "I want you to know that you have my complete support and confidence. These attacks on your character are attacks on this entire family, and we will not tolerate them." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Catherine replied, feeling grateful for his immediate and unqualified backing. The family spent the next hour discussing response strategies and media management. Isabella was particularly vocal about the need to be proactive in defending Catherine's reputation. "We cannot allow these innuendos and half-truths to take root in the public consciousness," Isabella said firmly. "Catherine has been an exemplary member of this family, and we must make that clear to everyone." As the meeting progressed, Catherine began to feel more confident about weathering this storm. With the full support of the royal family behind her, she believed they could overcome whatever else the press might throw at her. She had no idea that the woman offering her the most vocal support was the same person who had orchestrated the entire attack. After the family meeting ended, Isabella returned to her private apartments with Lady Margaret, both women maintaining their serious expressions until they were safely behind closed doors. "How did I do?" Isabella asked, settling into her favorite armchair. "Perfectly, Your Majesty," Margaret replied. "Your support appeared completely genuine. Even I found myself almost believing that you were truly concerned for Princess Catherine's welfare." "The key to this entire strategy is patience," Isabella said, accepting a cup of tea from Margaret. "I cannot appear to be anything other than a supportive family member. Let the press do the work of damaging Catherine's reputation. My job is to appear to be defending her, while quietly ensuring that more damaging information continues to surface." Margaret set down the tea service and looked at her employer with barely concealed unease. "Your Majesty, are you certain this is wise? Princess Catherine is genuinely beloved by the people. If it becomes known that these attacks originated from within the family—" "It won't become known," Isabella said with absolute confidence. "Because I'm not making any direct attacks. I'm simply ensuring that journalists have access to information that raises questions. If Catherine's reputation cannot withstand scrutiny, then perhaps she wasn't as perfect as everyone believed. And what about Prince Alexander? He's not going to stand by and watch his wife be destroyed." Isabella's smile was cold and calculating. "Alexander will do exactly what I expect him to do. He'll become increasingly protective and defensive. And the more defensive he becomes, the more it will look like he and Catherine have something to hide. Eventually, his efforts to protect her will actually make things worse for both of them." Margaret shook her head slowly. "Your Majesty, I've served you loyally for 15 years, but I must express my concerns about this course of action. Princess Catherine has never done anything to harm you or threaten your position. She doesn't need to do anything, Margaret. She just needs to exist." Isabella's voice took on a bitter edge. "Do you know what my approval ratings were last month? 68%. Respectable for a queen consort. Do you know what Catherine's approval ratings were? 87%. 87%, Margaret. She's more popular than I am, more popular than Alexander, almost as popular as the king himself. But surely that's good for the monarchy overall." "No, Margaret, it's not. Because when King Marcus dies and Alexander becomes king, Catherine will become queen. And on that day, my influence will diminish to almost nothing. I'll be the queen mother, a ceremonial position with no real power. Unless what, Your Majesty?" Isabella stood and moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where Catherine and her children had played just weeks earlier. "Unless Catherine's reputation is so damaged that she becomes a liability to Alexander's reign. Unless the public begins to see her as unfit to be queen. In that case, Alexander might be forced to choose between his crown and his wife." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "You're talking about destroying a marriage, Your Majesty. You're talking about separating a father from his children." "I'm talking about protecting the monarchy," Isabella replied firmly. "Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." As Isabella continued to gaze out the window, she was already planning her next move. The first article had been successful in planting seeds of doubt, but she needed to escalate the pressure. Jonathan Blackwood had proven himself to be an effective ally, but she would need additional journalists and additional angles of attack. She was particularly interested in pursuing the suggestion she had planted about Catherine's teaching credentials. Isabella's research had revealed that Catherine had taught at a private school for 2 years before joining the museum, but the school had closed down several years later due to financial difficulties. With the right spin, that innocent fact could be transformed into questions about why Catherine had left the school and whether her departure had contributed to its eventual closure. There was also the matter of Catherine's university thesis, which had examined the provenance of several artifacts in British museum collections. With careful research, Isabella was confident that she could find questionable aspects of Catherine's academic work that could be misrepresented as evidence of poor judgment or ethical lapses. The beauty of Isabella's strategy was that she was taking actual fact from Catherine's life and twisting them just enough to create doubt without technically lying. Catherine really had struggled with dyslexia as a child. She really had left her teaching position when the school was having difficulties. She really had written a thesis that examined potentially controversial museum acquisitions. None of these facts individually suggested any wrongdoing, but when presented by skilled journalists as part of a pattern of questionable judgment and less than complete honesty, they could be devastating to Catherine's reputation. Isabella was playing a long game, and she was very good at it. Meanwhile, Catherine was in her private sitting room, trying to explain to 6-year-old James why there were photographers gathered outside the palace gates, and why his school had called to discuss additional security measures for the following week. "Mummy, did you do something wrong?" James asked with the directness that only children possess. Catherine felt her heart break a little at the question. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes newspapers write stories that aren't completely true because they think people want to read them. Daddy and I are working with Grandpapa and Grandmother Isabella to make sure everyone knows the real truth." "Will the photographers go away soon?" "I hope so, James. But even if they don't, you mustn't worry. You and Emma are safe, and Daddy and I will always protect you." As Catherine tucked her son into bed that night, she tried to push down the growing fear that this situation was spiraling beyond their control. The attacks felt too coordinated, too well-informed to be random journalism. Someone with significant access to palace information was feeding stories to the press, and until they identified that person, the attacks would likely continue and escalate. She had no idea that her greatest enemy was sleeping just 3 corridors away, already planning tomorrow's assault on everything Catherine held dear. The second wave of attacks began on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the first Daily Chronicle article, when 3 major newspapers simultaneously published stories that seemed to corroborate and expand upon Jonathan Blackwood's initial reporting. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental, and this time the allegations were far more specific and damaging. The Times led with former colleagues raised questions about Princess Catherine's teaching record, featuring interviews with 2 anonymous sources claiming to be former colleagues from Catherine's brief teaching career. The Guardian published, museum experts questioned Princess Catherine's academic credentials, suggesting that her university thesis had contained research that violated ethical guidelines about artifact provenance. Most devastating of all, the Daily Mail ran with the secret relationship. "What Princess Catherine doesn't want you to know," complete with blurry photographs allegedly showing Catherine with an unnamed man during what the paper claimed was her engagement period to Prince Alexander. Catherine learned about the articles when her phone began ringing at 6 in the morning. The caller was her mother, Elizabeth Ashford, who was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Catherine, darling, I'm so sorry to wake you, but these horrible stories, they're saying such terrible things about you. I don't understand where they're getting this information." Catherine sat up in bed, immediately alert. Alexander stirred beside her, and she could see from his expression that he knew something was seriously wrong. "Mom, what stories? What are they saying now?" "They're questioning your teaching, your education, even suggesting that you were unfaithful to Alexander." "Catherine, these aren't just attacks on your professional qualifications anymore. They're attacking your character as a wife and mother." Alexander was already reaching for his phone, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the morning's headlines. "Catherine," he said quietly, "we need to get dressed and get to the palace immediately. This has escalated far beyond what we dealt with last week." 20 minutes later, they were walking through the palace corridors toward an emergency meeting that King Marcus had called for 7 o'clock in the morning. Catherine felt numb as she tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. The first article had been unsettling, but manageable. This coordinated attack felt like a declaration of war. They entered the king's study to find not just the immediate family, but also Sir Kenneth Morrison, Detective Inspector Williams, and several other senior palace officials. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and urgent. King Marcus looked older than Catherine had ever seen him, the weight of the crisis clearly taking its toll. "Catherine," he said, rising to embrace her, "I want you to know that we are treating this as an attack on the monarchy itself. We will not allow these character assassinations to continue unchallenged." Isabella was already seated at the conference table, looking perfectly groomed despite the early hour. She rose to greet Catherine with apparent warmth and concern. "My dear Catherine, this is absolutely appalling. The coordination of these attacks suggests a level of organization that goes far beyond normal tabloid journalism. Someone is orchestrating a calculated campaign against you." Catherine felt grateful for Isabella's support, but she also noticed something in Isabella's tone that struck her as slightly off. There was an intensity to Isabella's concern that seemed almost performative, as if she were making sure everyone in the room noticed how supportive she was being. Sir Kenneth cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highnesses, I'm afraid the situation this morning represents a significant escalation. The allegations being made are specific enough that we cannot simply issue general statements about Princess Catherine's integrity. We're going to need to respond point by point." Detective Inspector Williams spoke up. "We've made some progress in our investigation into the source of the leaked information. The details about palace security protocols could only have come from someone with the highest level of clearance. We're now focusing our investigation on a very small group of individuals who had access to Princess Catherine's complete background files." Catherine felt Alexander's hand squeeze hers under the table. "How small a group?" he asked. "Fewer than 12 people, sir. We should have definitive answers within the next 48 hours. Isabella's expression didn't change, but Margaret, who was standing near the door taking notes, noticed a barely perceptible tightening around Isabella's eyes. King Marcus addressed the room with the authority of someone who had weathered many royal crises. "I want everyone to understand that Princess Catherine has my complete confidence and support. However, we cannot allow these attacks to damage the reputation of the monarchy. We need to respond decisively and comprehensively." Sir Kenneth opened a folder containing response strategies that the Palace Press Office had been working on since the early morning hours. "Your Majesty, we recommend a two-pronged approach. First, we issue detailed rebuttals of each specific allegation, supported by documentation that proves the claims are false. Second, we launch our own investigation into who is feeding information to these journalists and why." Alexander leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of documentation are we talking about?" "For the teaching allegations, we have letters of recommendation from the headmaster and several colleagues at Princess Catherine's former school, all praising her dedication and effectiveness as an educator. The school's closure had nothing to do with Princess Catherine's departure. It was due to enrollment declines and financial pressures that affected many private schools during that period." Catherine felt some relief as Sir Kenneth continued. "For the academic allegations, we have her complete university records, including her thesis advisor's notes and the external examiner's report, all of which confirm that her research met the highest ethical standards. The suggestion that she violated artifact provenance guidelines is completely fabricated." "And what about the photographs?" Isabella asked, her voice carefully neutral. "The ones suggesting infidelity during Catherine's engagement?" Detective Inspector Williams answered this question. "We've examined the photographs, and they appear to be heavily manipulated. The man in the images appears to be Catherine's brother-in-law, Thomas, cropped and edited to make him appear unrecognizable. The photographer who allegedly took these pictures doesn't exist. The name given to the Daily Mail belongs to a photographer who died 3 years ago." Catherine felt a surge of relief, but also growing anger. "So, these are completely fabricated stories? Someone is literally making up lies about me and feeding them to the press." "That appears to be the case, Your Royal Highness," Detective Inspector Williams confirmed. "This isn't sloppy journalism or misinterpreted facts. This is a deliberate disinformation campaign." Isabella nodded sympathetically. "The question is, who would go to such lengths to damage Catherine's reputation? Who benefits from destroying public trust in our future queen?" As the meeting continued, Catherine found herself studying the faces around the table, trying to understand who could be responsible for such a calculated attack. The coordination and inside knowledge required suggested someone with intimate access to palace operations, but everyone in the room seemed genuinely concerned about protecting her and the monarchy. After the meeting ended, Catherine and Alexander returned to their private apartments to regroup before the day's scheduled engagements. Catherine had a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new children's hospital that afternoon, and they both knew that her public appearance would be scrutinized for any sign of how the pressure was affecting her. "Alex," Catherine said as they sat in their private sitting room, "I keep thinking about something Detective Inspector Williams said. If there are fewer than 12 people who had access to my complete background files, that means the person doing this is someone we probably know personally." Alexander nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. Someone we trust, someone we see regularly, someone who has been pretending to support us while systematically trying to destroy your reputation. But who? I can't think of anyone who would have a motive to hurt me like this. I've tried to build good relationships with everyone in the palace, from the senior staff to the housekeeping employees. Catherine, I don't think this is about anything you've done. I think this is about what you represent. You're popular, you're successful in your royal duties, and you're going to be queen someday." Someone seized that as a threat. Before Catherine could respond, there was a knock on their door. It was Amanda Rothwell, looking more flustered than Catherine had ever seen her. "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid there's been another development. Jonathan Blackwood has just published an article online claiming that palace officials are trying to suppress evidence about your past. He's suggesting that the investigation into the leaked information is actually an attempt to silence witnesses who might contradict your version of events." Catherine felt the room begin to spin. The attacks were escalating faster than their ability to respond, and now their own efforts to clear her name were being twisted into evidence of a cover-up. Alexander stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. "This is completely outrageous. They're not just attacking Catherine anymore. They're attacking the integrity of the entire palace staff and security apparatus." Amanda nodded nervously. "Sir Kenneth is recommending that we consider legal action against the publications involved. The fabricated photographs alone could support charges of criminal libel." "What does that mean for this afternoon's engagement?" Catherine asked, dreading the thought of facing crowds of reporters and photographers who would be looking for any sign of weakness or distress. "Sir Kenneth believes it's important that you proceed as scheduled," Amanda replied. "Canceling would be seen as an admission that the pressure is getting to you. However, security will be significantly increased, and we'll have additional press officers on hand to manage any hostile questioning." As Catherine prepared for what she knew would be one of the most difficult public appearances of her life, she tried to focus on the children who would be at the hospital opening. Whatever personal crisis she was facing, those children deserve her full attention and genuine care. She couldn't let the attacks prevent her from doing the work she loved. But as she applied her makeup and chose her outfit, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she was being hunted by someone who knew her intimately enough to anticipate her every move and counter her every defense. The precision of the attacks, the timing of the revelations, the specific nature of the allegations, it all suggested a level of planning and inside knowledge that was deeply disturbing. Meanwhile, 3 floors above Catherine's apartment, Isabella was having lunch with Margaret and reviewing the morning's news coverage with evident satisfaction. "The response has been even better than I hoped," Isabella said, scrolling through social media reactions on her tablet. "The public is beginning to question not just Catherine's honesty, but the palace's credibility in defending her. Look at these Twitter threads. People are asking why Catherine's background wasn't properly vetted before her marriage, why the palace is being so defensive, whether there might be other secrets we don't know about." Margaret set down her soup spoon with obvious unease. "Your Majesty, the investigation into the leaked information is apparently focusing on fewer than 12 suspects. What they trace the information back to you?" Isabella's expression remained calm and confident. "They won't, because I haven't technically leaked anything. I've simply had conversations with journalists about my general concerns regarding palace security. I haven't provided any specific documents or confirmed any particular details. As far as anyone can prove, I've been completely loyal and supportive. But what about Jonathan Blackwood? What if Detective Inspector Williams questions him about his sources? Jonathan is a professional journalist who protects his sources. Besides, our conversations were always about general security concerns, not specific allegations about Catherine. If he's gathered additional information from other sources, that's his business as an investigative reporter. Margaret looked increasingly troubled. Your Majesty, I'm concerned about what will happen when Prince Alexander inevitably discovers the truth. His loyalty to Princess Catherine is absolute. He won't forgive anyone who has deliberately harmed her. Isabella stood and moved to the window, where she could see Catherine's car leaving the palace ground for the hospital engagement. Alexander will never discover the truth, Margaret, because there will be no evidence to discover. And even if he had suspicions, he would never be able to prove them. By the time this is over, Catherine's reputation will be so damaged that Alexander will have to choose between protecting her and protecting his future reign. You really believe he would choose the crown over his wife? I believe Alexander is a future king who understands that personal desires must sometimes be sacrificed for the good of the monarchy. And if he doesn't understand that yet, the next few weeks will teach him. Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan Blackwood. Excellent progress today. Ready for Phase 3 whenever you give the signal. Isabella smiled as she typed a response. Proceed as planned. The target is weakening. That afternoon, Catherine's appearance at the Children's Hospital was a masterclass in royal professionalism under pressure. Despite the intense media scrutiny and the knowledge that every word and gesture would be analyzed for signs of stress, she managed to focus completely on the children and families she met. She spent extra time with a 7-year-old girl named Sophie who was recovering from heart surgery, reading her favorite story and promising to send additional books for the hospital's library. She listened intently as the hospital director explained their new cardiac care unit, asking detailed questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in their work. Most importantly, she maintained the warmth and authenticity that had made her so beloved by the public. Despite everything she was going through personally, her interactions with the children were completely natural and unguarded. But even Catherine's professional triumph couldn't protect her from what was coming next. As her car pulled away from the hospital, Amanda received an urgent phone call from Sir Kenneth Morrison. After a brief conversation, Amanda's face went pale. "Your Royal Highness," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's been another development. The Evening Standard is preparing to publish an article claiming that you've been having secret meetings with Jonathan Blackwood for the past several weeks." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. What? That's completely insane. I've never met Jonathan Blackwood in my life. They claim to have photographs of you entering and leaving a private club in London where Blackwood is also a member. The suggestion is that you've been feeding him information about palace security as part of some kind of publicity scheme to increase your own profile. Catherine stared at Amanda in shock. The allegations had now moved beyond attacking her past to suggesting that she was actively involved in the campaign against herself. It was so preposterous that she almost laughed, but the implications were terrifying. "Amanda, this is completely fabricated. I haven't been to any private clubs in London. I don't know Jonathan Blackwood, and I certainly haven't been meeting with him secretly. I know that, Your Royal Highness, and so does everyone who works with you daily. But the story is designed to be plausible enough that it will raise additional questions about your trustworthiness." As Catherine's car approached the palace gates, she could see that the crowd of photographers had doubled since the morning. The attacks were working exactly as intended, creating a media-feeding frenzy that would be nearly impossible to contain. She had no idea that the person orchestrating her destruction was at that very moment watching from her window, planning the final phase of an attack that would either destroy Catherine completely or force Alexander to choose between his crown and his family. The war for Catherine's reputation and for the future of the monarchy was about to reach its climax.